Welcome friends to the Secret Doctrine webinar. This is our third series and we are going to explore the last stanza of the first volume of the Secret Doctrine and also some slokas from the second volume. The general subject for this series is the birth of humanity. So throughout these 6 classes, we are going to see how humanity appeared on Earth and the early evolution of humanity until it got to a stage of evolution where what we can call culture begins. So in this first class, we will begin to explore the stanza 7 of the first volume, which is called The Parents of Men on Earth. And as usual, we will read the summary from HPB about this stanza. She says, Stanza 7 continues the history, tracing the descent of life down to the appearance of man, and thus closes the first book of the Secret Doctrine. The development of man from his first appearance on this earth in this round to the state in which we now find him will form the subject of Book 2. So we will see, as I said, some of the shlokas from the second book. Now, you see that Blavatsky says this particular stanza, which belongs to the volume on cosmic evolution, talks about the appearance of man, as she says, but beginning with the hierarchies of celestial beings that are involved in the development of a human being. So as we are going to see today, the first shloka in this stanza talks about all these different hierarchies of being. So let us start with the first shloka. It says, Behold the beginning of sentient formless life. First, the divine vehicle, the one from the mother spirit, Atman. Then the spiritual, Atma Buddhi, the spirit soul. Again, the 3 from the 1, the 4 from the 1, and the 5, from which the 3, the 5, and the 7. And there is a note that Blavatsky says that when she mentions here Atma and Buddhi, this relates to cosmic principles, not to how these principles manifest in human beings. At this point, we are still talking about this from a more cosmic point of view. And then it continues, These are the threefold and the fourfold downward, the mind-born sons of the first Lord, Avalokiteshvara, the shining 7, the builders. It is they who are thou, me, him, all Anu, they who watch over thee and thy mother, Bhumi, the earth. And this shining 7, the builders, there is a note that Blavatsky says are the 7 creative rishis in Hinduism, now connected with the constellation of the Great Bear. So we are going, as usual, we are going to go line by line and see what the shloka is saying using the commentaries from HPB. So first, the first line says, Behold the beginning of sentient formless life. So we are talking about the beginning of consciousness, but not on the physical plane, not consciousness as it manifests through a body, through a physical body, but the beginnings of consciousness on the formless levels of reality from the oneness that is behind everything and that is beyond even what we conceive as consciousness, down to what will become a human being. So the first line has to do with the beginning of this development. And Blavatsky explains the hierarchy of creative powers is divided into 7, or 4 and 3, esoteric, within the 12 great orders, recorded in the 12 signs of the zodiac. The 7 on the manifesting scale being connected, moreover, with the 7 planets. All this is subdivided into numberless groups of divine spiritual, semi-spiritual, and ethereal beings. So she introduces here what she calls the hierarchy of creative powers. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, we have this concept of angels, archangels, but normally what their roles are is not necessarily very well defined. Although if you go to the theology, you can find some definition for these angels. In the general knowledge of the population, angels seem to be some kind of furniture in heaven that don't have much of a function in the working of the cosmos. Now, this is not so in the esoteric philosophy. The idea is that the deity is like the architect. The deity is the one that has the plan, the blueprint for the cosmos in mind, in the divine mind. And it is all this hierarchy of celestial beings that we have explored in the previous series, the ones that are the actual masons, the ones that build the cosmos, that develop the different entities on the different planes. So the first thing that begins to develop when a new cosmos is built is the manifestation of all these different beings on different planes, all this hierarchy of celestial beings, the physical beings like human beings and animals, etc., being the lowest link in this chain of manifestation. So she says there are 12 great orders of divine beings connected to our planet, the evolution on Earth, and 7 of them are particularly connected with the different planes in which evolution takes place. Blavatsky explains in another writing that of these 12 orders, 5 have already accomplished their work and they are beyond our system of evolution. So there are only 7 hierarchies that are left still working on our Earth. So the idea is that these 12 hierarchies in some way are connected to the signs in the zodiac. Why are there 12 and not 10 or 15 or more? There are certainly many constellations around, but the idea is that in some way there is a certain influence that comes from these constellations that are represented in the signs of astrology, and this influence is coming from these hierarchies of celestial beings. And then of the 7 that are more involved with the evolution on Earth, they are also connected to what in astrology or in the past they used to call the 7 sacred planets. Blavatsky many times says that it's not that the ancients didn't know that there were more than 7 planets in the solar system. It's that only 7 of them are sacred, meaning are connected to different hierarchies of celestial beings, and we receive their influence through these planets in some occult way that we discussed a little in previous series, but we cannot go into it right now. So this is a diagram that may help us visualize what Blavatsky is saying there. We have 12 great orders represented by these stars. 5 of them are beyond the manifested planes. If we here in the diagram we have these 7 manifested planes which are involved in the development of evolution on Earth and also other planets around. But within these 7 manifested planes there are 7 hierarchies of beings, which are 3 on the 3 higher planes and 4 on the 4 lower planes. And when we talk about hierarchies, we are not talking about one single being or kind of being for each one of these stars. There is actually a whole hierarchy of beings for each one of these stars. So there, as we are going to see in the shloka, there are many celestial beings manifest, but they all belong to different orders, if we want to call them in that way. So these 7 orders are connected to the 7 sacred planets, and there are the 5 orders that are beyond the active work in our system. So then there is a brief description of all these different hierarchies of beings, beginning with the most spiritual and divine and subtle, and ending with the lowest of the hierarchies of celestial beings, the one that is closest to the physical kind of entities that we know. So the shloka says, first the divine vehicle. There is always this idea that any entity that we see or that we talked about on any plane is the vehicle for the divine. So the divine vehicle, the vehicle that is manifesting, that is closest to the divine mind, is this first hierarchy. And it says the one from the mother spirit. And Blavatsky adds the word Atman. Atman means self, the universal self, this oneness that is behind everything. So she explains all these, the upper and lower hierarchies, emanate from the heavenly or celestial virgin, the great mother in all religions, the androgyne. As we discussed in earlier series, Blavatsky says that in the ancient traditions, the mother was the first manifestation, not the father. The mother is the first manifestation of the divine. You have, for example, in India, Aditi, which is the mother of all gods. And so in the Secret Doctrine also, the feminine aspect of the cosmos and the divine is the first one to manifest. And from the feminine aspect emanate or are given birth to the different hierarchies of beings, the different gods or angels. So she mentions here that the heavenly or celestial virgin is this mother from which the first hierarchy emanates or is given birth. And it is called the celestial virgin because the potentiality to produce, to emanate a hierarchy of beings is within itself. It's not necessarily that it is impregnated from the outside. It is the potentiality to create is within the very mother, and that is why it's called the Virgin Mother, which Blavatsky says is the foundation for the idea in Christianity of the Virgin Mary, for example. And then she says that at this divine flame, the one, this first hierarchy of beings, are led the 3 descending groups. Having their potential being in the higher group, they now become distinct and separate entities. So in the esoteric view, the idea how things are created or manifested is different from the idea that we normally get in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Normally we think that God created something out there as a person uses certain materials and creates something that is quite different from himself. But in the esoteric tradition, the process is not so much one of creation, but one of manifestation or emanation. It's more similar to the idea of giving birth. When the mother gives birth to the child, the whole body and structure of the child comes from the very substance of the mother. It's not that the mother makes something out of herself, outside of herself, and makes a baby out there. the baby is, in a certain sense, emanated, is produced from her very substance. In a similar way, everything in the universe is produced from the very substance of the divine. The first emanation, the highest, the most spiritual, is said to be a unity. There is no separation there because the divine is a unity. But as this divine nature emanates in lower and lower planes, what happens is that those emanations begin to generate an individuality separate from the other. So as we go lower and lower in this chain of emanations, that which began as a unity now seems to be separate beings, separate entities. And that is what Blavatsky is saying here. So she brings a commentary to the book of Dzyan, which is this unknown book that Blavatsky says her teachers had, and there are some ancient commentaries attached to the stanzas that we are reading. And she brings part of the commentary and says, the first is the divine fire. So you see that this idea of the first hierarchy is related to fire, as we are going to see. The second, fire and aether. The third is composed of fire, aether, and water. The fourth, of fire, aether, water, and air. So you see how with each new emanation, we come from something that is homogeneous, that is one element, the unity, now begins to differentiate. Now in the second hierarchy, there are two elements. In the third one, there are three elements. So we begin from the simple into more and more complexity. Now HPB adds a note that says that these elements, fire, air, etc., are not the fire that we see on earth or the air. These are allegorical terms because they represent, if anything, the spirit of the elements that we see on earth. And then the commentary also says, the one is not concerned with men bearing globes, but with the inner invisible spheres. So the first hierarchy that is emanated, this unity, is really beyond the spheres in which humanity develops. There is always this pattern in the esoteric philosophy that we have seen in previous series too, that the first emanation, which is a unity, remains always beyond, like not involved in the process of differentiation. It's not that it's separated. Actually, this first emanation, this first unity, is the background, the space within everything differentiates, the substance from which everything is differentiated, and yet it becomes always or remains always beyond. If we relate this to a state of consciousness, the idea is that, for example, our mind is involved in our life, in making decisions, our emotions too are involved, our body is involved in the actions, but there is an aspect of ourselves that remains always beyond, just as a witness. It's a state of pure consciousness that is watching, that is perceiving, that is aware, and that very awareness is embracing and allowing all this differentiation and actions and feelings and thoughts to happen. But there is always, the highest state is always not concerned, in a sense, not involved. It's allowing this to happen. All this happens because that is there, but remains always beyond. So that happens both at the level of the human being, the hierarchies of celestial beings, or the cosmos itself, the deity itself. So if we have a little diagram, we see that from the mother spirit, and you see Blavatsky said that this principle is androgyne. Androgyne means that both genders are there in one. So we call it the mother philosophically because it's, we could say it's a passive nature, but within the mother is positive and negative. It's the potentiality for the positive and masculine, active, or the negative, receptive, feminine, all this in a philosophical sense. So sometimes it is said we see the father-mother or the mother-spirit trying to bring the two elements together. From it emanates the order of fire, then the second order of fire and ether, and there is this continuous emanation, as we said, that with each new emanation there is a new differentiation, more complexity. So this is what the next sentences in this shloka are going to talk about. So we saw first the divine, the Atman, and then the spiritual, Atma Buddhi, spirit soul. Blavatsky's explanation, the second order of celestial beings, those of fire and ether, corresponding to spirit and soul, or the Atma Buddhi, whose names are legion, are still formless but more definitely substantial. So you say that the second order of celestial beings whose names are legion. So when we talk about the order, you don't think of one kind of celestial beings. There are many kinds of celestial beings that belong to this order. They are all related somehow, but they may be performing different functions in the process of evolution. And if this order corresponds in human beings with what we call in Theosophy Atman and Buddhi. These are the two highest aspects of a human being. Atman, the universal self that is expressing through each particular human being. And Buddhi is the second highest aspect. It comes from the Sanskrit word Buddh, which means enlightened or awakened. This is the source of wisdom. Atma Buddhi is the divine spark that is within each human being. So as we are going to see, this second order of beings has to do with the presence of the divine spark in a human being. Now, Blavatsky says they are the first differentiation in the secondary evolution or creation, a misleading word. She's referring to a theory of evolution in Hinduism. They say there are two stages of creation. They call it the primary creation, the secondary creation. The primary creation is about forming the cosmos as a field of consciousness. Before consciousness begins to really act, is generating all the different kinds of matter, the elements, the possibility of perceiving, what they call the organs of perception. And then the secondary evolution is the development of consciousness, the evolution of consciousness on this earth from the highest celestial beings down to the physical entities that we know, humans, animals, plants, etc. So she says creation is a misleading word. Evolution or emanation or manifestation may be better. But the point is that this second hierarchy of celestial beings is the first differentiation. You see, the first one is homogeneous, is a unity. The first differentiation, the falling into complexity happens with this second celestial hierarchy. And Blavatsky says they are the prototypes of the incarnating jivas or monads and are composed of the fiery spirit of life. The idea of jivas or monads are different names to refer to the divine spark that in human beings assumes a particular individuality and expresses on the physical plane as a specific person. So jivas or monads, we can think of that as the divine spark that is individualized and that will, in each one of us is individualized in a different way. And then it expresses on the lower planes through a physical body, a mind, emotions. So this hierarchy of beings, the second, are the prototypes of this divine spark. Prototype is a way Blavatsky used it to say it's like the spiritual blueprint, or is before the formation of this divine spark in human beings. And she says, it is through these celestial beings, that passes like a pure solar beam, the ray which is furnished by them with its future vehicle, the divine soul, Buddhi. So remember that we said Atman is the universal self, the divine self, that is behind everything. And then in each human being, that divine self begins to manifest in a more individual way. So the first vehicle of this universal being is Buddhi, the divine soul. So Blavatsky says that the divine self comes like a ray, like a beam, through these hierarchies, and these hierarchies furnish a vehicle of expression for the divine being, for the universal self, which is what we call Buddhi in Theosophy. So, for example, we have this diagram that may help visualize it. If we think of this as the universal self, then this is the second celestial order of celestial beings, the second order. So the universal self, expressing through the celestial order, generates what we can call the monad, or the divine spark in human beings. There is a vehicle, Buddhi, a vehicle of expression, which is expressing part of this universal self. Words really fail here. We have to remember, anytime we are referring to these very spiritual, formless, abstract concepts, any words we use are inadequate. So take it allegorically. The universal self is universal, it cannot be separated. But we can say allegorically that a ray from the universal self is now expressed more individually, which is represented by this white circle, and will manifest through Buddhi. And this is a divine spark that will express itself through a human individuality. So she says that these celestial beings are directly concerned with the hosts of the higher world of our system. And then from these twofold units, remember this was fire and ether, emanate the next hierarchy of celestial beings, that is the threefold. There will be three elements there. But let's come back to this idea that the second order of celestial beings is the hosts of the higher world of our system. By our system, Blavatsky is referring to a technical concept that we studied in our previous series, the idea of a planetary chain. To summarize it for those who may not have seen the previous series, the idea is that our Earth is one globe, let's say, in which evolution takes place, but this field of evolution is connected to other spheres, to 6 other spheres, and when the spiritual nature of human beings and any kind of being on Earth begins to evolve, it begins to evolve in a kind of spiritual sphere, if we want to call it in that way. It's the highest sphere of this chain of globes, of which the Earth is a part. And then after the period of evolution is accomplished there, life goes to a slightly more material sphere and evolves there, then to a more material sphere, and finally it comes to Earth. After the evolution on Earth is accomplished, then it goes back to a more spiritual sphere, and then it keeps going up until it reaches the highest globe or sphere in this process of evolution. Now this is one cycle. To accomplish the whole evolution, 7 of these cycles are necessary. Each of these cycles are called a round. So the first order is beyond these 7 globes of evolution. The second order is connected to the highest globes of evolution. So because this order is very spiritual, it works at the level of the divine spark in human beings. So the shloka says again, the three from the one. And see that although this third celestial order emanates from the second one, the shloka is saying the second emanates from the one, the three from the one, the four from the one. You see that it's constantly reminding us the idea that all this is coming from the one. Even though the second is emanating the third, and the third emanates the fourth, all these are just manifestations of the one. So Blavatsky says the third order corresponds in human beings, there is this idea of correspondences, to what in human beings is Atma Buddhi Manas, the spirit or the universal self, the soul, which is Buddhi as we saw, and the intellect. And it is called the triads. So there is an order of celestial beings that is related to what we can call our intellects, not so much as they manifest through the brain, but the intellect as this higher mind that remains whether there is a body or there is not a body. You know, when we die, what happens is that this intellect divests itself from the physical body and then from the emotions and then from the physical mind that we know that expresses through the brain. And then it is in its own nature as a spiritual kind of mind. This is the intellect. So that intellect will incarnate after a process of development after death, will incarnate in a new body. So the idea is that this third order is related to these three higher spiritual principles in us. And then the four from the one. Now Blavatsky says the fourth are substantial entities. And for those who have seen the previous series, remember that the idea in this sevenfold model of the universe that the esoteric philosophy offers, the first three, the three highest planes are always thought of as formless, spiritual, where the substance aspect is very tenuous, is very subtle. And then the lower four planes are more substantial, more material. So this fourth hierarchy of celestial beings are substantial entities. This is the highest group among the rupas. Rupa is a Sanskrit word that means form. These hierarchies, with this fourth hierarchy, we begin to conceive some kind of very subtle form. The three higher are formless. We cannot think of them in terms of something concrete. The separation between them is just the hierarchies feel at one with each other, or each of the celestial beings in the hierarchy, they feel at one with each other. It is with the fourth hierarchy that it begins this sense of individualization, this sense of being different from another expression, another celestial being. Now, Blavatsky says it is the nursery of human conscious spiritual souls. So this is in the esoteric philosophy, our souls, which is what we really are. Normally we identify with the person, with Pablo, for example. But Pablo is a transitory manifestation of the divine being that is expressing through Pablo. Now, in the esoteric tradition, the idea is that these divine beings, which are the essence of all our personalities, they constitute an order of celestial beings. They are celestial beings. So we, in our true nature, we are an order of celestial beings, the fourth order. We are the fallen angels. We are fallen not because of any sin. We are fallen in the sense that this fourth hierarchy of celestial beings, in its process of evolution, the field of experience, the field of evolution for this hierarchy of celestial beings takes place on the lower planes, including the physical plane. So all the angels, all the celestial beings are evolving as they work to build the cosmos and to have different functions within the cosmos. They are evolving. So what is the evolution of our essential natures? The evolution is to experience the universe through a physical frame. So we are these fallen angels, these angels that have fallen into matter, because that is what this hierarchy of beings, of celestial beings that are our souls, need to learn at this point in evolution. So we could say that we are the fourth celestial hierarchy or celestial order. Now, Blavatsky says they are called the imperishable jivas and constitute, through the order below their own, the first group of the first septenary host, the great mystery of human conscious and intellectual being. So we as these celestial beings, we are part of a hierarchy. There are different souls that are animating the physical bodies, and we all as souls form this hierarchy of beings. And then there are other celestial beings that are working with us also, that Blavatsky mentions there. But we don't need to go into too much detail. When we see the stanzas from the second book, in the second part of this series, we will have a little more details as to what this means. For the time being, what this stanza is intending to offer is just a general view. So this is the fourth. Remember, the fourth is fire, ether, air, and water. These four elements, and that's our own hierarchy of celestial beings. And then there is a fifth one, and then the five. Blavatsky says the fifth group is a very mysterious one, as it is connected with the microcosmic pentagon, the five-pointed star representing man. He is the dragon of wisdom, or manas, the human soul, the intelligent principle called in our esoteric philosophy the fifth principle. So the idea is that this hierarchy of beings, of celestial beings, the fifth one, is connected, as we are going to see later, with the awakening of mind in humanity. When we as a celestial being incarnate in physical bodies at the beginning of human evolution, there was the need of certain help to awaken the intellectual aspect of the soul within the body. And that help comes from this order of celestial beings. We will see all this more in detail in the future, but the point that the commentaries from HPB are trying to make, as we are going to see a little more clearer today, is that what human beings are is inextricably linked to all the celestial beings around. We are what we are because we are a team effort of all the celestial beings to produce this human being. At the same time, from another point of view, from the point of view of the other celestial orders, they also are the result of the activity of all the other celestial beings. Actually, they are evolving through our own activity, and we are evolving through their activity. So when you start having a glimpse or a feeling of what the esoteric philosophy is proposing, is this very interconnected net in which we are all evolving together, helping each other, and we are all the result of everything else around us. This is not too different from what we see even in physical ecology. We have a body because we eat what the earth produces. we are evolving because the planet is setting up the field, and we use the planet to evolve. And at the same time, the planet is evolving through us, through our activity. So there is no real separation. We tend to think of us as individual, isolated, separate, but this is actually a whole unity evolving different aspects of itself. One aspect of this unity is what we call human beings. And there are many other aspects of this unity. And what evolves is the whole unity. So then the next sentence, from the five, from this fifth order, from which the 3, the 5, and the 7. So from this fifth order, there are others that emanate. And Blavatsky says the 6 and 7 groups of celestial beings partake of the lower qualities of the quaternary. In Theosophy, the quaternary is the personal nature, let's say, of the human being, which involves our physical body, a subtle counterpart of the physical body that we are going to explore later, because it's related to what these hierarchies of beings do. Then our vitality and our emotional nature. So this is the lower quaternary. So the 6 and 7 hierarchies are connected with this lower nature. If you see all the other hierarchies that we have explored so far are really connected to the spiritual aspects, our spiritual aspect. The fifth one is in between. It's like a bridge. It's connected to or is involved in how to connect the spiritual to the personal, to the physical. But the two lower hierarchies are connected more to the lower aspect of a human being. So Blavatsky says they are conscious ethereal entities, as invisible as ether, which are shut out like the boughs of a tree from the first central group of the 4, and shoot out in their turn numberless side groups, the lower of which are the nature spirits or elementals of countless kinds and varieties. So we have, it is the idea here of, again, the emanation of hierarchies. The lowest aspect of these hierarchies are what we call nature spirits. In traditional Western esotericism, there is this idea of the gnomes, the sprites, the salamanders, the sylphs, which are the spirits behind the elements. The idea being that nature everywhere is alive, that there are forces of nature which have their own consciousness, not necessarily consciousness like a human being, but just like a bee is a conscious entity. It's it performs a function in nature and is a conscious entity, even though the bee doesn't have the same mind that human beings do. In a similar way, these nature spirits, which are non-physical, they have their own consciousness and they perform their own roles in the development of nature and the evolution and the growth of nature. So these nature spirits are the lowest link in this chain of celestial beings, and we all form this collective consciousness that is evolving together, as I said. And then Blavatsky says the 6th group, moreover, remains almost inseparable from man. And when Blavatsky uses the word man, this was written in the late 1800s, so the gender language wasn't an issue. But also, it's using the word man in a more technical way. She explains that the word man in English comes from the Sanskrit word manu, and manu means the thinker. So manu is any entity that has the ability to think. Philosophically speaking, if there is any entity in other planets that can think, no matter what their external appearance is, then that is a man, that is a thinker, that is a human being. Human being as it would manifest in another planet, in other conditions. So when she talks about man here, she normally refers in an abstract way to a human being, a thinker. So the sixth group remains almost inseparable from man, who draws from it all but his highest and lowest principles. That is, his spirit and body, the highest the spirit, the lowest the body. The 5 middle human principles being the very essence of those dhyanis. Dhyanis is a Sanskrit word for celestial being. Alone the divine ray, the Atman, proceeds directly from the One. So the Atman, the universal self, which is the essence of ourselves, that proceeds directly from the oneness. But then all the other principles are in some way, the different orders of celestial beings are involved in organizing, either by emanating the matter, the spiritual matter necessary for these principles, or by organizing them into bodies, into vehicles of consciousness. We don't really know all the processes that are involved in producing a human being on the different levels. But Blavatsky always says, follow the law of analogy, and you will have a sense of what happens on the higher planes. So in the womb, the baby is formed out of the matter of the mother, and there is some kind of intelligence there that guides the formation, the form of the baby, and how the cells are going to differentiate and how they are going to form organs in different ways. So from the esoteric point of view, all this happens with the intervention of many different entities. In the Theosophical tradition or in the esoteric philosophy, as we talked in a previous series, no force in nature is just a blind mechanical force. Every force in nature is the expression of some kind of consciousness. Consciousness in a wide sense, not a little thinking human being. So all the forces involved in creating a baby on the physical level are representing all these different hierarchies of beings. But this happens also not only at the physical level, also on the higher spiritual levels. There is a gestation of a human being on all the different levels. And that is how the different hierarchies are involved in different ways. So Blavatsky says the occultist calls these hierarchies of beings the ancestors or the Pitris. Specifically, she's talking about the sixth one. The Pitris, they are the sixfold Dhyan Chohans, celestial beings, having the 6 spiritual elements in the composition of their bodies. In fact, men minus the physical body. So this sixth order, out of the 7 planes, it manifests on the 6 higher planes. The only plane in which they don't manifest is on the physical plane, which means they don't have a physical body. But we do have a physical body. We are a hierarchy that manifests on all the planes. So this 6th hierarchy manifests on all the 6 lower planes except for the body. And we are going to see, these are called the Pitris, and we are going to see what they do in the how they work in the physical or the evolution of human beings. We will see that in the second part of the series. Now, I'm bringing something from the second volume here that can illustrate what we are talking about. Blavatsky says, though the 7th principle, which is Atman, the universal self, though the universal self reaches man through all the phases of being, through all the different planes, the universal self permeates all the planes, is omnipresent, is this unity within which we move and act and have our being, as St. Paul would say. So the 7th principle reaches man through all the phases of being, pure as an indiscrete, meaning non-separate, element, and an impersonal unity. So the universal self is this unity, non-differentiated, impersonal. Now, that universal self passes through the highest group and the second, these two higher orders that we saw, passes through, again, allegorically speaking, and begins to manifest in a human being as its own higher self. So the universal self passes through the highest group and the second, which too radiate on men his Atma. Atma is self. So this is a way of saying the universal self is this unity, and what these hierarchies of being do is generate a kind of illusory separation so that that universal self may begin to have an individual experience through this particular person, and then another individual experience through another particular person. This illusory separation, illusory because ultimately speaking is always the one self, is mediated by the hierarchies of beings. An example that I often use is the idea of a magnifying glass. If you think of the light of the sun as this one light, around the earth that is not really separate, it's just one mass of light. But then if we build a magnifying glass and we can generate like a beam that seems to be individual, separate. If you have several magnifying glasses, then you have different beams that seem to be separate, individual, one from the other. You may make one beam do something and the other beam do something different. But this is just the light from the sun. It's not really different. It's not really separate. There is a focalization of that light by means of the magnifying glass, so that it seems that it is an individuality. So in a similar way, these hierarchies of beings focalize a ray from this universal self, which will express as the individual self of each person. And then the third group cement the Buddhi to Atman. These were the two highest principles, and to the higher attributes of manas, to that intellect. So the third group, you see, each hierarchy makes the manifestation of that individual self, which comes from the universal self, it makes it more and more complex. It adds more faculties to the expression of the universal self. So now it is through the third hierarchy that we have a mind. So that is the idea with these hierarchies. Now she talks group 4, and I'm adding there that this is probably the fifth order, because the fourth order is our own souls. So probably this fourth group, without taking into account our own order, is the fifth order. And she says, endows him, the fourth hierarchy of beings, which is what we are, endows him with his manas and its vehicle. Manas is the mind, the vehicle is the kamarupa, or body of passions and desires. The two elements of ahamkara, ahamkara is a Sanskrit word for the sense of I am myself, which evolve individualized consciousness, the personal ego. So the fifth order is connected to generating what we call our personal ego. So you see how there is a gradual bringing down the universal impersonal self into an individual spiritual self, and that into an individual personal self, which expresses through this body, these emotions, and this mind. So the fifth order is related to that. And finally, it is the spirit of the earth in its triple unity that builds the physical body, attracting to it the spirits of life and forming his linga sharira. Linga sharira is the subtle aspect of the physical body. We are going to discuss this in next classes in this series. So it is the lower two hierarchies that are involved in the creation of the physical body. And that shloka finishes by saying, "It is they who are thou, me, him, O Lanu," Lanu means disciple, "they who watch over thee and thy mother, Bhumi, the earth." So you see that these hierarchies of beings, we are them from a certain point of view. We are of their very substance. Our consciousness comes from them also, from a certain point of view, and also they are watching over the development of humanity and the evolution of Earth. Now, how is it that they are ourselves? Blavatsky says, if asked, is this in the same sense in the material world, where the Son is in one way his Father, being his blood, the bone of his bone, and the flesh of his flesh? To this, the teachers answer, verily, it is so. But one has to go deep into the mystery of being before one can fully comprehend this truth. So in the same way that our body comes from our parents, and we can say are the expression of our parents, in a similar way, we are the expression of the hierarchies of beings, but in a far deeper way. She says, to really understand this, we have to understand the mystery of being, not just the physical body that we have. This individual consciousness that we express is the result of the work of all these different hierarchies. So, in Buddhism, they say that there is no permanent self, because the self, what we call self, is actually the result of all these different forces and hierarchies of beings that are evolving and that are forming us. For example, even in the physical body, if your body is not working well, and the hormones, for example, are not working in a balanced way, that produces in you certain emotions. Now, those emotions are really produced by the body, because if you fix that, then those emotions are not there. However, at the level of your personal emotion, you say, these are my emotions, this is what I am, this is what I feel right now. So your personal consciousness is being, or within your personal consciousness that you think is my own, you have the body introducing elements there. Your personal consciousness is the result of many external influences. The influence of the body, the influence of our emotional body and mental body, the influence of our higher nature, and all these different influences acting together form what we call myself, what I feel, what I think, etc. So in a similar way, what we are is the result of the action of all these hierarchies of beings. So we are inextricably connected with everything around, and we are the result of the actions of everything around. Therefore, there is no real separation. This is a very deep truth that the more we realize it, the more fascinating it becomes, the idea of what we are, because ultimately speaking, we are the whole. And that's the purpose of the esoteric philosophy, to help us realize that. And then the second sloka, which is the last one that we are going to explore today, says, the one ray multiplies the smaller rays. Life precedes form, and life survives the last atom of the form, the Sthula Sharira, which is the Sanskrit word for the physical body. Through the countless rays, the life ray, the one, like a thread through many beads or pearls. So this is talking about one ray that multiplies in multiple rays, and all these countless rays are expressing or expressions of the one ray. So let's see what this means. There is this idea that Blavatsky will talk or refer of the Sutratman. The Sutratma is a Sanskrit word that is like the thread that goes through different beads, in a necklace, for example. So the idea is that this thread is our eternal being, which is self-existing, but in each one of what we call lives, one aspect of this eternal being manifests as a particular personality. And as I was saying, now I feel that I am Pablo, but this Pablo is just a fragment, is a particular expression of this eternal being that is what I am. And same for you and for everybody else. So in this incarnation, I'm experiencing the universe or the world, let's say, as Pablo. But then after the incarnation is over, I come back to being what I really am, which is this more eternal being. And then after a while, a new expression in a new personality will be manifested, will be produced. There is a series of experiences that I will have in that new personality and then come back again to the eternal self. So this eternal self, the one ray, goes through or divides, expresses in multiple rays, but it is the essence of all of them. So it's like goes through all of them. So Blavatsky says, this shloka expresses the conception of a life thread, Sutratma, running through successive generations. That's what I just explained. Now, she says, how then can this be explained? By resorting to a simile, to a familiar illustration, though necessarily imperfect, as all our available analogies must be. So she's going to look at this in a far more complex way, an esoteric way. She says, at the end of the 19th century, in the 1800s, science knew that there was, in some way, because of the work of Mendel and Darwin, the scientists, they knew that in some way, from father or mother to the children, there were certain characteristics that were passed on from generation to generation. They didn't know about the DNA yet. So they would talk about a kind of physical plasm that was passed on through cells. So this is what Blavatsky is referring to here. She says, complete the physical plasm, the germinal cell of man, with all its material potentialities. So today we would say, complete this idea of the DNA that is being passed from parents to children. Complete that with the idea of a spiritual plasm, or a spiritual DNA, if you will. So to say, she says, or the fluid that contains the 5 lower principles of the 6th principled dhyani. So she is saying, just as this, the parents pass on the DNA to the children, the celestial beings can be seen as passing on the spiritual DNA to the different incarnations that we take. So it's an allegorical way. In some way, when we die, everything that we did in the previous life, every virtue that we developed, every habit that we have to overcome, personal habits, all that stays. And it's like a spiritual DNA that will be passed on to the next personality when we take another incarnation. And then we inherit not only a physical body, but also an emotional and mental body, which are the karmic continuity of what we did in our previous lifetime. So she says, all this is mediated, is enacted or made possible by the dhyanis, and particularly she talks about the 6th order, which has to do with the with the lower quaternary, with our body, emotions, and mind. So complete the physical with the spiritual heredity, and you have the secret if you are spiritual enough to understand it. So the last point we will see, Blavatsky says, mankind in its first prototypal shadowy form is the offspring of the Elohim of life, the Pitris. So as we are going to see later, we come out of the substance, our first experience on earth as physical beings, come out of the substance of these angels, these Pitris. In its qualitative and physical aspect, humanity is the direct progeny of the ancestors of these lowest celestial beings, the Dhyanis or spirits of earth. For the moral and psychic and spiritual nature, it is indebted to a group of divine beings, the name and characteristics of which will be given in Book 2. We are going to see that in the second part of this series. So from a physical point of view, we come out of these lower angels. From a spiritual and moral and mental point of view, we come out of higher angels. Collectively, men are the handiwork of hosts of various spirits. Distributively, the tabernacles of those hosts, because our bodies are the tabernacles, the expression of we as a celestial being, as the fourth order, and occasionally, she says, and singly, the vehicles of some of them. Because occasionally, some human beings, maybe in what we call enlightened beings, become the vehicle, the fully conscious vehicle of the celestial beings that are what we really are. So this is what we will discuss in our first class on this subject, and we will continue with stanza 7 in our next class next week. Thank you everybody, and have a good week.